Hey everyone, it's Jack and Mike, who was our trend master and a key leader on our content team. One of our key leaders there. It's here to talk about the big picture trends that we'll see in 2022 and beyond. And before we get into all of them, I wanted to remind you all, luckily and thankfully, many, if not most of you, already use our Report Pro service, which gives you unlimited access to 1,000+ reports with brand new reports on every topic imaginable around the world of food, published every single week. And I wanted to call out maybe just a couple of the new key reports you may want to check out the next time you are in Report Pro. It's an awesome one on what the state of global sandwiches looks like. We always talk about innovation being back, and if you want to innovate in the US, often the best way of doing that is looking at what those influences are from around the world. And it's sort of amazing what you could put in between two slices of bread or something that approximates bread. Mike, we're gonna have a real debate one day as to what constitutes a sandwich. I feel like that's a 2-hour episode right there, but check out.
I think didn't we actually do the survey if consumers think hot dogs are sandwiches?
Yeah, I guess it is ultimately up to them.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah. But definitely check out the World Bites on global sandwiches. And kids menus are always an interesting topic. This is one of the areas of food where price isn't the biggest concern with consumers. It's actually having greater variety than what exists now. So here's a short report on the key things you need to know about kids menus and what consumers want out of them. That's available now. We have a report on robots and AI in food. Check that out. This is becoming increasingly important. Mike's going to talk about that a little bit. And a really great report called America in Transition that just looks at how this country and its people and attitudes and behaviors and motivations around food are really evolving in some pretty dramatic ways that impact certainly what we should all be doing as an industry. So check this one out. This is a really great read. And we added a new feature too inside our Snap interface where new Report Pro reports will actually show up in the bottom ribbon now as a reminder of just some of the new great content you could find. And then when you click the Report Pro button up at the top, it takes you and you can see all the stuff in one place. So before we get started into the main thrust of today's content, I'm going to give you all one chance to let us know if you'd be interested in getting some more information about Report Pro if you're not already using it. And then after we go through this, Mike, I think we'll get started on some big trends. So
great.
I know you and the team, Mike, worked hard and with a lot of dedication towards coming up with the big picture factors. Was there a lot of agreement or disagreement as to what the big factors were? Was that obvious and self-evident, or did you have to really sort of debate quite a lot?
No, I mean, I would say the 7 big picture factors that we look at are the same every year as far as what's happening within those factors and what we should kind of, bring to the top. I mean, yeah, there's some debate, but for the most part, yeah. I mean, you could kind of read all the articles and see that there's a consensus in a lot of these areas.
Okay, and why don't we go ahead and then get started with that? So I'm going to end this poll. Thank you very much for letting us know if you're interested. And we're going to talk about 2022 trends. Mike is going to get us kicked off, and it starts with a report you can actually get in Report Pro right now. I think did we publish it this morning?
Yep, literally, I think an hour and a half ago. So it's as fresh can be.
So we're going to look at some excerpts from this report today, but there's a whole lot more to explore in the report. Mike, take us through what we found.
Yeah, so this report, I just want to kind of queue up. So there are 2 reports that we released early in the year. There's our 2022 annual trends deck that, is all the foods, all the flavors, all the ingredients, all the kind of, food focused things that we think you should pay attention to in 2022 and beyond. And that's coming. That's actually going to be released in 2 weeks. And that's the real focus of the webinar in 2 weeks. This report looks at some of those macro factors. So it's economics, it's politics, it's demographic, it's how is our lifestyle going to change. And it's really those kind of big picture factors that, really, impact every facet of American life and business. But then we particularly look at what's happening in the food industry. So that's what we're going to look at. I feel like I don't know, I don't want to make too many promises, but by the end of this hour, I hope you'll just have a better idea of kind of the cadence of 2022 and what's going to happen in some of these, bigger areas. And we'll start with economics. I think this is the one that people are probably most concerned about, most curious about in the year ahead. This is the one I feel like we read 100, 150 articles. We looked at what the economists were saying to really get an idea of what people are saying about, the economic picture for 2022. It is mixed. I mean, I will say overall, it's kind of maybe cautious optimism, heavy on the cautious, I think, and the number one reason for that being COVID, if you do believe that, COVID is going to hopefully get a bit better this year, maybe, move a little bit more to that endemic stage. So not necessarily a pandemic where, we're worried about it 24 hours a day, but it's something like the flu where, yes, we're worried about it. Yes, it's impacting American life, but it's not necessarily our top concern all the time. Then, that means we can get a little bit more back to normal economically. I think, the interesting thing about this too is if you see what, a lot of the economists are saying, they actually didn't say 2021 was that bad from an economic standpoint. Yeah, we absolutely had the issues surrounding inflation. We absolutely had issues surrounding supply chain, but then there were positive factors too. Obviously, jobless claims are way down in the past year. We're actually the only member of the G7 nations that has a bigger economy now than we did prior to the pandemic. So there were some good indicators in 2021 leading into 2022. And then if you go to the next slide.
I don't know if there's a lag. I'm on the inflation slide.
Okay, great. Yeah, maybe there is a bit of a lag. It almost feels, if you read all these articles, the kind of key concern is moving from COVID to inflation. That's really kind of the key concern for a lot of economists right now. It absolutely will be for Q1 and Q2 of 2022, probably, well into the end of the year. I think, the thing about this is that there are a lot of people working to make sure that inflation, lowers in 2022. The Fed has indicated that they're going to raise rates 3 times this year. Their hope is that we will get inflation down to 2.6% by the end of the year, which I think a lot of people think is a little bit optimistic, but it at least goes to show that, they feel pretty optimistic about the general trajectory of 2022. The real fear, I think, is wage spirals, which, you read a lot about these wage spirals that could possibly happen. The average wage increase for 2022 is 3.9%. So if you have, all of these various businesses raising wages, they, raise prices. And so then you have the employees at the businesses saying, well, I need higher wages so that I can pay these prices. So then, we just see these wage spirals. I think that's a really key concern if you talk to economists for 2022, that we get trapped in a wage spiral.
Last number was what, 6.8, I think?
Yeah, I think it's I know it's in the 6% range. Yeah.
And the optimistic projection from the government is they can maybe get it down to 2.6.
2.6. We'll see.
Probably pretty optimistic, but okay, I guess we'll see.
We'll see.
So we asked consumers too, how long do you think this is going to last? And I think this is a question from December of last year or late November of last year. And basically, people said, this inflationary period, I don't think this is going to last. This is going to end anytime soon, with a big chunk thinking it goes deep into 2022 or into 2023 and beyond. So even if they're not actually prepared for it in their ordinary lives, consumers at least expect the inflationary period to be here for a while. It's not going to be a big surprise to them if high prices are here for a little bit.
And it is an area I would say that consumers tend to be a little bit more pessimistic on. They tend to kind of answer this question based on what's happening to them right now. So they go to the supermarket, they see the higher prices, and they think that's going to happen for the foreseeable future. And, we will see what happens in the future. I know we've done some research around this that said that, consumers are seeing the higher prices most often at supermarkets, but the area that they cut back the most is restaurant meals. So, whether this continues or even it's just the perception of, continuation, it does impact our industry and what consumers do in the future.
It's true, right? The direction that something has moved in, like for you personally, is the direction that you think it's going to continue going in. So like if you're playing blackjack in Vegas and you keep losing hand after hand after hand, you almost just start to expect to lose each subsequent hand, which makes no sense. And here's the thing, consumers say, look, if inflation does go the other way and we don't move towards 2.6 and we go to a number higher than 6.8, and for food, it's been particularly high, especially for food bought at the store, they'd say that restaurant meals is gonna be one of the things that they cut back on the most. So getting inflation under control is gonna be an important thing for the growth of food service. And look, I don't think any of us can predict precisely what's gonna happen with inflation. We could tell you what economists say. We could tell you what the government says they hope to accomplish. But we're at a fairly high number right now, and hopefully it moves in the right direction. Now, I will say, look, when we're in the 70s, that number was approaching near 20%. So we're certainly not at an all-time high.
Yeah, I mean, that's the number. If you look at any number over the course of 2022 in relation to economics, that's what everybody's watching. That's really the key concern right now. But then the third concern, obviously supply chain issues. Again, we're going to be dealing with these, for the foreseeable future, certainly into Q1 and Q2. I think, again, like inflation, the general consensus is that directionally we're moving in a positive direction. There was some easing up of some of the supply chain issues at the end of 2021. There's a lot of effort, behind kind of normalizing the supply chain, a lot of technologies related to the supply chain coming into play here. And we'll also see some normalizing of purchases too. We're not always going to see, consumers rushing back, buying everything, post a pandemic again. There's going to be some normalization of what they're purchasing in the future.
So this is interesting, Mike. I mean, we asked across a number of different domains of life of the world how consumers are feeling, and I think we saw, not a ton of positivity in some of these areas, starting with the economic outlook.
Yeah, so we asked the general outlook for every single macro factor that's in the report. And you'll see, I mean, as we go through all of these, the results are very mixed. Here you can see they're mixed for this particular macro factor itself. So, there's some consumers who absolutely say that they think it's going to be pretty positive, but there are more consumers who have a negative outlook on the economy for the future. But I think a lot of people think that the general consumer outlook is very negative for 2022, which isn't necessarily the case.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic though. Just 7% are really positive and only 31% are positive overall. And I think as we move through some of the other macro factors, you see this in a few different categories, not all of them, but certainly a few of them. So this is actually interesting because this actually mirrors pretty well what we've seen from operators too. So since the start of the pandemic, we've been asking operators on, I think, pretty much a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, what do you think your future prognosis is, your ability to sort of survive the pandemic and thrive beyond it? So are you cautiously optimistic? Are you worried about things, but still pretty confident that you're going to make it okay? Or are you really nervous about your business prospects or your prospects of survival overall? So this is asked among food service operators across all segments, but doesn't include the big chains. Those are folks that we would talk to separately. So sort of more like the street, if you will. And you can see when we got to May of this last year, May 21, optimism was at a high, right? We had, vaccines were rolling out and people were really sort of positive about that at the time. And then things started to sort of wane a little bit, and we're not quite as optimistic as we used to be. At least operators aren't quite as optimistic about their business as they used to be. And I think a lot of that has been exactly what Mike was talking about, the pressure from supply chain issues, from labor issues. Those have become greater factors for many operators than COVID itself. So we had a nice upward trend from the depths of COVID, but we're back to a little more sobering number in terms of operator optimism currently. But I think it's the ripple effects of COVID with labor and supply chain versus the health and safety aspect of it. And you start seeing this in more and more. So in chat, drop a comment if you've seen this at restaurants that you go to, where the restaurant will literally tell you as a customer, we can't get enough people to work here, so we have to cut hours or be closed a certain day. Or I like the one on the left where they say, if your service isn't up to par, please don't be a Karen and post a bad Yelp review. Don't blame us, it's not our fault that we can't find people. I will say, Mike, I don't know if you've experienced this, restaurant service quality has not been as good as it has been traditionally over the past 6, 7 months or so. You get a lot of brand new people working there that you can tell haven't been fully trained yet, and it's totally understandable, but it is palpable, I think.
And you do see it on social media. I'm in a bunch of restaurant groups locally, and you see consumers complaining all the time about it.
Yeah, but it is remarkable. You have restaurants that are just closed entire days, or no longer open for lunch, or no longer open for breakfast, skipping entire day parts because of the labor shortage. And we ask operators, when do you think the labor shortage will be resolved? And this is fresh data that I think was fielded in just the past few days. They say, I don't think it's going to get resolved anytime soon. The vast majority say it's going to be 6 months from now, or that the labor market for food service workers will never be the same. You have a lot of people saying, I'm not sure either, but you have hardly anyone saying that this is going to be a short-term phenomenon. And as a result, operators have started making changes to the way that they treat labor and how they recruit and how they retain workers. And this is really staggering. So we asked in last May, which of these things have you done as it relates to labor? And we asked again in December, this last December, just a couple of weeks ago. And you could see what the December number looks like. And in the column over, you could see how much that December number has changed versus May of 2021. So call it like a 7-month change. These are really, really big changes, right? So in December of 2021, 35% of operators say they've now started hourly wages above the mandated minimum wage, right? That's a 19% lift over what it was in May. So it was only 16% in May, 35% in December of last year, right? Big gains, restructured scheduling to make shifts more predictable for employees. 33% in December, only 20% in May. Offered performance-based or retention based bonuses to hourly staff, 23% in December, only 14% in May. And then offer a signing bonus to hourly employees. Like, I don't know, was that ever really a thing, Mike, in the past, where there'd be a signing bonus for an hourly employee? I never got one.
Some places there. Yeah, I never got one, absolutely.
I didn't know that, but look, 22% in December, only 9% in last May. So operators have been making changes with the vantage point of this not being done, being taken care of in the short term, that the labor supply shortage is going to be here for some time. So they have to make some changes to keep people on staff. Mike, let's talk about a non-controversial topic, politics 2022. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so there is a bit of a lag on my end, but yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think people are almost pre-tired of talking about the midterm elections, where it's just like that, like fear that this is going to kind of take over the conversation for the year. But I mean, this is kind of the major story for 2022, what everybody's going to be watching, which is the midterm election. I don't think there's a forecaster out there who doesn't say the Dems aren't going to lose both the House and the Senate. I mean, for a variety of issues, it tends to happen historically, when one party is in power, in the White House, they tend to lose the midterm election. Biden's approval ratings are pretty low right now, so it just seems like it's going to happen, barring something crazy this year, who knows? I think the thing about that is, if you're relying on some type of legislation in the future, in 2023 or 24, if you have lobbyists working in Washington, there is that possibility that the 2 years after the midterm elections are going to be pretty lame duck, and we're not going to see a lot of legislation passed.
Can I ask you a question, Mike, and maybe just to folks in front of. So I feel like we've been talking about this stuff for so long that it almost feels like we've already had the midterms and we're already at 24 at this point. Was this ever really a thing in the past? Like, were the midterms that big of a topic, 15, 20, 30 years ago? It feels like it's a recent phenomenon that this is such a big topic of conversation.
I mean, as polarization has gotten so extreme, absolutely. I mean, like this year, the House and the Senate are so close, it can throw power one way or the other. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it seems like it's nonstop political talk every day of the year for every 4-year cycle, and you never get a break from it anymore. I don't think it used to be like that.
Yeah,
right?
no, nothing like this. Absolutely nothing like. If anything, a lot of I used to work in politics, and a lot of the talk about midterm elections is that nobody cares. Like nobody comes out to vote. People still don't necessarily come out to vote for them. But I mean, another factor this year is also there are a lot of gubernatorial elections for 2022,
Yep.
which does have an impact because we've seen so many of the COVID policies and regulations differ from state to state. So it absolutely has an impact on regulations that impact our industry. And
So,
then in the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, so Build Back Better.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely more near term, but this is, kind of what everybody is talking about, at least for the next few weeks, which is the Build Back Better Act. Whatever you think about the Build Back Better Act, it is a huge amount of money. So it's $1.75 trillion. So whether this passes or not, it can have, a pretty big impact on our industry and just consumers overall. Some of the things in the act are, it would give families, low-income families, $65 a month in the summer when it's kind of that period when they're not in school. So, kind of get them through the summer so that they can purchase food. There's universal kindergarten. There's all kinds of things that really do impact us as an industry. I think the general consensus right now is pretty negative. I think a lot of people don't think that this is necessarily going to pass, but it changes so like on a dime. Honestly, like Senator Joe Manchin, who's pictured here and is kind of the linchpin, it's kind of whatever meeting that he had that week, that's kind of what the consensus is about what's going to happen with it. So
yeah, I tend to follow, for politics, I tend to follow the betting markets, which tend to be a better predictor of things because it's real money being exchanged over there. So I would highly recommend it for anyone interested in politics. Watch what's happening in the betting markets. COVID policies and how they're changing, Mike.
And then, yeah, so I mean, this is what we were talking about earlier. And this is the hard part. The COVID policies and, the kind of political impetus behind them is just so different from state to state and locale to locale. Tomorrow, the Supreme Court is going to look at two of the lawsuits brought up against the Biden administration's national vaccine mandates. So it's that vaccine mandate a lot of people have heard about that impacts businesses that have more than 100 employees. So in the near term, we're going to see, absolutely some kind of guidance come out. In the, shorter term, I mean, we just continue to see, like we talked about here in Chicago, this week now we have a new vaccine mandate to go into restaurants. So we continue to see politically, quite a lot of changes when it comes to policies that affect our industry.
Yeah, so the Chicago thing is really interesting. And again, I haven't been following chat, but I don't know if anyone's shared experiences, what they've seen when they've tried to go to a restaurant in some of these cities. But here's a look at some of the big cities across the US and what their policies are around vaccination, being able to enter a restaurant or other public spaces. So you have a pretty good assortment of cities over here. If you look at, I think it's like 3 of the top 5, I think it is the 3 biggest cities in the nation are doing this, and a big chunk of the top 10 as well. And in most cases, it is full vaccination required. In one case in Philadelphia for the next, what is today, the 6th, for the next almost 2 weeks, you could also show a negative test to get in somewhere, but after January 18th, it becomes vaccination or nothing. And I guess I have a question for everyone here. So without, inserting your thought on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, we probably all have our own personal opinions on that. You could share them, but that's not what the poll question is. Here's the question for you. If we were to pick the date of, let's say, August of this year, do you think you will see more big cities with vaccine mandates to enter places like restaurants, or will there be fewer big cities? So will the vaccine mandates expire in these cities that already have them at a faster rate than more cities add them? Or do you think more cities are going to add mandates and the ones that already have them, they'll still be there by midsummer? Mike, what do you think?
I mean, what I personally think versus what I think people will choose may be different. I think, I don't know, I'm going to assume
you
that
making that statement makes suggest that you think people are wrong.
I think more people are going to say that they think there will be an increase in the number of big cities.
What do you think?
I actually do think there will be a decrease.
Yeah. I actually agree. I think there will be a decrease, but who knows for sure. So why don't we reveal the results of the poll? We have several hundred people have voted already. It's basically a split, 55-45 in favor of there being an increase versus a decrease. And you want to sort of think about that. So for there to be an increase, it would mean you'd have to find more cities that have not already jumped on board that bandwagon, being willing to do so. And I feel like if you were going to do that, you probably would have already started to take steps toward it at this point.
When I think the big, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I think the big factor probably is other variants too. I mean, when you look at Chicago, our vaccine mandate is pretty much just because of the Omicron variant. So if you saw some new variant come up that was, highly viral and very dangerous, maybe you would see other cities do it. But if you don't necessarily think a new variant like that is going to occur, then, there's not necessarily the need for these mandates.
Yeah, I think, look, and it could be totally wrong, but I think we're going to start seeing an attitudinal shift in what COVID is over the course of the next 2 months. And that may be the thing that pulls us out of all of this, but we'll see. Okay.
I agree. I think that, and we'll talk about that in the wellness section a little bit.
So over half of consumers think that people will never go back into the workplace at the same rate they did prior to the pandemic. I think if we polled this group here, because this is, essentially all white collar folks, that's probably gonna be a little bit different because the general consumer number includes people that are both white collar as well as blue collar. But even among the population as a whole, over half say, people never going back to work the way they used to be. So if you think about some things we've talked about in the past in this webinar and in our reporting, you want to look at some of those areas that have a high degree of variable population, meaning that a lot of the population there during the day are people coming into work as opposed to people that live there. And those will be the areas that have to transform the most and become something different. You can't just be, office building after office building after office building, or they're going to suffer the consequence of there just not being a whole lot of traffic compared to what there was before. But it seems pretty well accepted at this point that work is not going to be what it once was. We're not going back.
And we asked this question in this particular way because it gets at the number of employees who are not going back full time. So, some of the questions that are asked are, are you working remotely or are you going back to the office, which is kind of like, you're either one or the other. Whereas a lot of people are going back maybe 1 day a week or maybe 2 days a week. And so this kind of gets at that maybe we're not necessarily going back at the same rate that we did before, even if some people are going back to the office, maybe, a couple days a week or once a month or something.
I mean, just think, how many of you work at a company that had an advertised return to office date that then got pushed back, or maybe even got pushed back more than once? I'll be the first to say, we sort of had a planned return to office date here at Datassential, and it just sort of got back.
Yeah.
We're now marching forward towards having a new office and hopefully getting folks back in. But yeah, it's been a thing.
Yeah. And
the outlook for people on US politics this year, this is terrible.
Yeah, it's this, of all the sections where we asked this question, this was the most negative by far. People just do not have a generally positive outlook on US politics, which I don't think is surprising at all.
This is extremely unhealthy, right? Like if you were a doctor and this was someone's medical chart, this would be, red alert type of stuff. I mean, it's not been like this historically. I mean, it's not been great, but this is really bad. So,
and I think we're starting to see that become part of the conversation more, that, how does this impact democracy? I think that's going to be a much bigger topic of conversation in 2022.
It feels like as a society, at least in this country, we continue to find things and find angles to allow that thing to divide us in some way. And these should be things that unify. So luckily, food hasn't gotten there yet where it's become a force of division. It should be a great force of unity. So perhaps our industry can do some of the healing that's necessary and make people friendly with their neighbors again. We'll see.
Yeah.
Demographics.
Demographics, we'll go through this one quickly. I think there's kind of one main story, which is on the next slide here. So this is from some data that came out from the US Census Bureau from the 2020 census. And the real story is that population growth is slowing it's almost unprecedented. It is unprecedented. So the US population grew at 0.1% in the past year, which is the lowest rate that it's ever grown in the history of the census. So it's, and it sounds like one of those things like, okay, I'm like, that's interesting, but it's actually in an economy like ours, where so much of growth is predicated on that population, it really can impact, our economic growth into the future.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at the chart, this is the annual percentage change in the U.S. population over the last century or so, and typically in a year you have, I don't know, 0.5%, 1%, up to 2% population growth. We dropped to 0.1% in 2021, right? Not 2020, like the first COVID year. In 2021, it was an absolute, walk off of a pier relative to what it's been in the past. So we're not quite below the replacement rate, for a population, but got sort of dangerously close over there. And what you might want to think about too is just look, if birth rates are declining, and we'll see if that holds or not, but immigration is still happening. That means a greater percentage of the population of the US will continue to be represented by immigrants and immigration than by birth in the country. And we've been saying for a long time, this is where flavor preferences and the desire to try new things from around the world, a lot of it comes exactly from that, as those people bring their preferences, their tastes, their traditions, their cultures, all the delicious stuff into this country. It just continues to grow and grow the overall demand. Try those things. So the general lesson of, hey, if you're innovating with food, look for influences and inspirations from around the world. I think that holds even more true today than it has in the past. So let's keep watching those global food trends.
And that's absolutely true. If you look at the census data, I mean, we're absolutely a more multiracial population than we ever were. That's absolutely true. I think looking at this data too is interesting. I think some people have a tendency when we talk about the 2021 data on that slowing population growth to chalk it all up to COVID, which COVID is a big part of that. Obviously, sadly, we had a large amount of the population pass away in the past year. But that doesn't, if you look at the long-term trajectory, even over the past decade, it's been declining. So it's not just due to COVID.
Let's talk about millennials, which no longer seem like a youthful generation.
They're not, absolutely. And I'm a millennial, so yeah. I think the interesting thing that kind of came out of COVID that we'll be looking at in 2022 is that millennials hit a lot of the milestones that previous generations had hit earlier, and they're just hitting them a little bit later. So they accounted for over half of the home sales over the past year. They accounted for well over half of new car sales in the past year. They're having children to some extent, although definitely not at the rate that other generations did. So you see millennials hitting kind of these milestones of, I hate to say adulthood, but that we might have considered associated with adulthood in the past. So if this is a cohort that you're focused on or that you're interested in or that you really target, their life stage and the choices that they're making may be very different right now.
So are the personality traits that were fairly or unfairly assigned to millennials 10, 15 years ago by older generations, those hold true, and are millennials now assigning those exact same traits to the next generation?
I don't know. Well, what were the traits that were assigned to me?
I don't know. We'll leave that to people to figure out. And the next generation, which I think probably, as you said, Mike, will probably be called Generation Alpha, although I don't know if it's entirely set in stone. I mean, Generation COVID is sounds like to me, but what about this next generation of consumers?
I mean, I don't know if any generation wants to be called Generation COVID, but yeah, so Generation Alpha, I think we're going to see, we've already seen a little bit of an interest in them in the past year, but we're going to start to see more of an interest in them in 2022. So this is the generation born after 2010. And it's just exactly what you said, Jack. It's, that's a generation defined by COVID. They've, spent the past 2 years learning virtually. They're absolutely as tech savvy as you can imagine. We're going to talk about the metaverse in a little bit, but for a lot of younger kids today, they exist in virtual spaces all the time, whether it's Roblox or Minecraft or whatever it is. And that's the norm for them. We were reading articles about some of these young kids having birthday parties in these virtual spaces. So it's definitely a multiracial generation, and it's also the most educated generation of all.
So this is the generation after Gen Z. Is there a meaning to the term alpha, or is it just lack of creativity and we're going to start with the alphabet all over again?
That's a great question. Yeah, it does kind of seem like we're just.
It seems so generic, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll come up with a better name.
Maybe, yeah.
Education, what do people think about it?
So, obviously we can't ask, what do you think about demographics overall for the year? So education is one of the things within demographics that we consider in the report. So we did ask consumers what they think of the general education system in the US. And it's a lot more mixed to negative than I would have thought. I kind of thought like in the US that we're pretty proud of our education system. I mean, I don't have a kid. I've been out of the education system for a while. So, but it's fairly negative actually.
Do we have any stats or have you seen anything on like perceptions of homeschooling? Is that something that continues to increase? I mean, did so much of that happen during COVID that now it's just sort of a normal way of educating a kid?
Yeah, I know we've talked about this on the content team. I don't know if we've seen any specific data, but yeah, I know that anecdotally that's been a topic of conversation.
Technology. This is my favorite topic.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is the one that you just have been waiting for. So, I mean, technology, I don't think there's any doubt that 2021 was another pivotal year for technology. I mean, COVID just sped up so many of the technologies that were already in motion. And so we'll talk about 3 of them in this section. The number one being robots and automation. Again, 2020 being so pivotal because of that labor crunch. We've seen, Denny's has robots serving, food to customers. We see college students, interacting with robots on their college campuses. We see autonomous vehicles, autonomous Teslas. Walmart is doing, autonomous freight delivery trucks. Automation and robotics is here to stay. It's only going to get bigger. If it's not an area that you're really focused on, it really needs to be, in the year ahead.
I just bought, and I'm testing it right now as we speak in the other room, is a robot window cleaner. It's like a robot vacuum, but it goes in your window and it generates suction. It just goes up and down your window and it cleans the thing for you.
Yeah, does it work?
I had no idea you could even do that. It's amazing. Pretty cool. Honeycomb, what is this?
Oh yeah, so, and if you want to see some of the next gen technologies that are going to come out, the Consumer Electronics Show is going on in Las Vegas right now. And there's some incredible technologies in robotics and automation. So this is one from Beyond Honeycomb. This is actually a mock-up of the actual booth that you will see at the CES show. And what it is, it's actually an AI system that you have a famous chef prepare one of their favorite meals or something they're really known for. The AI takes into account everything that chef is doing. It takes 2 days to crunch all that data, and then it can recreate that exact meal down to the molecule wherever that robot is on Earth. So they have a collection of about 7 chefs who prepared the meal in their kitchens, and then they are recreating those meals down to the molecule at this booth at CES right now. And it's all based on machine learning.
So the idea is this will enter into a restaurant kitchen or home kitchen at some point?
Possibly, yeah. So the idea could be one that, yeah, if you're a major brand and you have a chef that's, working on whatever dish or has some ethos, you can recreate it exactly as that chef would make it in your restaurant kitchen in the future.
So is a person physically preparing this, or is a robot doing all the cooking and mixing and...
So I tried to find videos. There's actually not that much information. There are robotics in that, but I do believe there are humans helping at this point. I believe, yes. But don't quote me.
Now claim like, hey, at our restaurant, you get the food that Gordon Ramsay made just as he made it. Essentially.
Literally exactly what he would want, yeah.
Digital currency, NFTs.
And this is the one area where we couldn't decide if we should put this in economics or in technology. We ultimately decided to put it into technology, but obviously it impacts economics. I think the thing about this is if you are in this space and you are focused on this space, you know how big it got in 2021. And if you're not, you have no idea how huge this space became. So in 2021, the NFT market, so those non-fungible tokens, which are the digital artworks that you can purchase, that market passed $23 billion last year. And the global cryptocurrency market crossed $2 trillion last year. It's huge, huge amounts of money. And of course, we see absolutely a huge number of food brands moving into this space, incorporating cryptocurrencies into their payment systems and the like.
So didn't I just see some big chain say they're doing some NFT stuff now to some big restaurant chain?
I'm sure, yeah, multiple. Yeah, I'm not sure which one
is that Beeple work still the highest pricing that's sold so far?
It's not. So on the next page, we have the highest price one, which sold in December, but it was for the longest time. So this is the highest price ever paid for a single NFT or digital artwork. It's The Merge by a digital artist called Pack, and a group of people got together and they paid $91.8 million for this NFT. So huge, huge amounts of money being spent in this space.
What is it?
What is it?
What is this?
Oh,
Two dots. I mean, what the heck is this? And why is it $100 million?
It's art, Jack. Yeah, you're asking the wrong person if you're asking what it's.
It's ridiculous. Okay.
Yeah, but I think that's that idea that this is ridiculous is also kind of the other conversation happening surrounding all of this, which is it a bubble? Are we going to see these huge amounts of money? I don't know if you pay attention to the Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT. Have you heard of this, Jack?
No. What is it?
So it's called the Bored Ape Yacht Club, and it's a collection.
Bored Ape. Yeah.
Of ape NFTs. So it was just announced, I believe, this morning that people have spent $1 billion on the ape NFTs at this point. So,
and some of them have been mispriced, and people bought them for like 1/1000th of the price they're supposed to be because someone typed in the wrong number of Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, then the one guy on Twitter lost all of the ones that because he found there was like a phishing thing, and he lost $1 million worth or something. So
there's also he has $250 million of Bitcoin on a USB drive in a landfill place, right?
Yeah. But I think that's going to be the story in the year ahead. I think we're absolutely going to see a lot of movement in this whole area, but we're also going to see this continued conversation about, is it a bubble? Is it going to continue?
All right, so Mike, can you tell us what is the metaverse?
The metaverse, yeah, I know. That's what I feel like. This is another one that people are already tired of hearing the phrase metaverse. I mean, a metaverse is honestly just literally a digital, space that a person can inhabit through an avatar. So we already have metaverses. I mean, The Sims is a metaverse. The thing that people think is going to happen in the future, which, Facebook, when they change their name to Meta, which they're, betting on, is that, virtual reality technology becomes so realistic that it's not, the painful experience that you experience right now. They're working on things that are more tactile, so you can feel things. When you look at, Gen Alpha and the up and coming generations who already feel really comfortable working in these spaces, I don't think there's any doubt when you look at the amount of money that's being spent here that this is going to become a bigger space in the future.
Think of all the people you see in restaurants sitting at a table together, and all they do is stare at their individual phones, even when they're sitting together at a table. They are already living inside their device. Now you can really live inside your device, right? This is going to be huge. I think it's sort of probably not great for human well-being, but hey, well, what do you know? But it's no doubt going to be big. But I think you're right. It's one of those terms, metaverse, that just no one really knows exactly what it means. It's going to be adapt and change, certainly. What do you see as some food applications for this?
And I won't get too much into it because we're actually going to cover this in 2 weeks. It's one of the core kind of key trends for 2022 Trends Deck. But we already see some restaurants existing in metaverses. So you can, last year in Roblox, you could visit a virtual Chipotle, and you could actually get a coupon for a burrito in a metaverse. So we're already seeing some food brands. Honestly, like I kind of feel like a lot of this is like before social media happened, where it was like, we don't need to be on Facebook, we don't need to be on Twitter, we don't need to be on Instagram. And then of course, every food brand and every restaurant is on it. I think that's going to be the case in the future, where every brand is going to have some type of place that you can visit within the metaverse.
Like, where do you fall on the simulation theory debate? Do you think we're?
Oh gosh, I knew you were gonna bring this up. Yeah.
Is life as we perceive it to be, or are we all just living in a simulation?
I haven't made a decision personally. I know where you fall.
You all in chat. For those of you that have an opinion, is life what we think it is, or are we all just living in a simulation? Tell me what people say. Okay, what's your outlook on technology in 2022? Look at these numbers.
Right? This is crazy. I mean, we actually had to move over the header on this page because the feelings are so positive about where technology is moving.
Yeah, which is the exact opposite of politics. So
yeah, by far, yeah.
In opposite direction.
But I think it is interesting. I think there is kind of this conversation that, people are not ready for it. People don't necessarily want to see all these robotics and AI, but the general outlook for the future is pretty positive.
And yeah, I want to make this really clear. There may have been a period a few years ago where people said, I don't want robots messing with my food. That period is gone. Consumers are broadly accepting of it. We have replaced so many things that used to be human-based with robots, automation of some sort, kiosks, devices. Consumers are okay with it now. They're not putting up a fight. The only generation that really puts up much of a fight at all, and even that is not a very significant one, is among the boomer population. But the number just keeps moving in one direction. Robots, AI, computers, food, all that in the world of food, totally acceptable to consumers.
And normalizing so quickly, absolutely. And if you are interested in this, we do have this new 5 in Focus report, which has 5 great stats that you need to know about robots and AI, literally just released in Report Pro yesterday. And then, yeah, we'll move through these last couple pretty quickly here, but wellness, absolutely, I know a key concern for the industry and consumers overall. If we move to the next slide here,
COVID.
So COVID, you can't talk about health and wellness without talking about COVID. If we look at 2022 in the immediate term, obviously the Omicron variant is impacting consumer health. We do see, hospitals saying that, they're seeing some, increase in the number of patients, although definitely not the numbers that we saw with, the Delta variant. I think the other thing that, the conversation which you mentioned earlier, Jack, is, when do things start to normalize? When does it become endemic instead of a pandemic? And from everything that we're hearing from, Dr. Fauci to the World Health Organization, the feeling really is that 2022, if it doesn't happen in 2022, this is when it begins to happen. We have a lot of, antivirals, vaccination rates globally are going up. And so I do think there's going to be a point as we, head into the later half of the year where it's not necessarily, the huge, daily, we talk about COVID all the time topic that it is right now.
Do you think with elections coming up, there's going to be political pressure to sort of show that America has emerged from COVID in some way versus portraying this as something that continues to be a serious problem?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if there's any topic will be politicized, absolutely. But this one in particular, sure. But I think the other thing too, and we mentioned this in the report, is we're also moving into a time where we're talking a lot more about some of the impacts of COVID and long haul COVID. So I know we've talked to a number of clients who say they're working on various functional foods that are aimed at consumers who maybe have some long-term impact. Particularly, we've still heard from a lot of, Americans who say, and, people around the world, that they don't necessarily have their sense of taste and smell back, which of course, obviously impacts our industry a lot.
Have we seen a stat on what percentage of Americans still have an altered taste of smell or altered sense of taste or smell?
And we were looking for something recent, but we should field this data because we didn't find anything.
Yeah. Self-care.
Self-care, obviously a word that we've heard for years and years, but there's kind of a renewed interest in it. This is related to what we were talking about at the top of the hour, Jack, moving away from, resolutions and kind of negative aspects of our lives to really just taking care of ourselves. We see a lot less, stigmatization of, things like anxiety and depression. And we see a lot of interest from consumers in food products that help them take care of themselves. So I think there's actually a stat on the next slide here that it's something like over 50. So 54% of consumers say they're extremely or very likely to purchase foods or beverages that are specifically designed to improve mental health or well-being. And then there's another 31% who say they're somewhat interested in these. So really, broad interest from consumers, from our industry in products that, kind of support that idea of self-care.
Yeah, and this is very compatible with our view of the evolution of health in consumers' minds, that we're in that third wave of health right now. The first was around, weight management and low fat and low calorie. That's like 1980s. Then we got into the very early 2000s. It was about feeling good about what you put in your body, not putting bad stuff in. So natural, local, organic, et cetera. And now we're in that third wave of functional foods, foods that actually do something for you, such as improving your mental well-being or your physical well-being. This is the big growing opportunity. Foods and beverages that are perceived to actually do something positive for you in some way.
Absolutely.
Plant-based, Mike.
Great, and I won't get into this too much. I know it's an area of huge concern, but we're going to get into this a lot in 2 weeks, because I know there's a lot of questions about how consumers have changed their purchasing of plant-based foods. There's no doubt that we're going to see a lot more plant-based foods on the market. We're going to see a lot more options that go beyond just plant-based burgers in the next year. If we go to the next screen here, we always field this question. We ask consumers, do you want to eat more plant-based options in the year ahead? And 36% of consumers say that they're trying to increase their consumption of plant-based proteins in 2022. So still a large percentage of consumers who plan to eat more plant-based foods in the year ahead, although this number is down from last year when 43% of consumers said the same thing. And some of that may just be that consumers are already eating so much plant-based food that they don't necessarily have to increase their consumption as much.
We have a bucket of chicken.
Oh, yeah. So then the other thing, and I know we've talked about this with a lot of various trends, is that whenever you see a trend grow, there tends to be kind of that equal and opposite reaction from consumers and from the operators and from people in the industry who have a stake in, kind of the opposite thing happening. But, one thing that we're seeing from consumers is a little bit of pushback against some of these plant-based foods. And, moving again towards some of those kind of whole fruits or whole vegetables. So we ask consumers, what do they prefer? And 60% of consumers say they prefer plant-based foods that showcase the fruit or vegetable instead of mimicking another food, whereas 40% say they, really like it to mimic the traditional counterpart. And you probably hear it all the time from consumers. They say things like, I don't need my peas to pretend to be hamburgers or things like that. So we do see kind of this cohort of consumers who are, rejecting plant-based foods for this reason. And so we'll get into that more in 2 weeks.
Your general outlook on your own health and wellness.
People feel pretty good about their health in the year ahead. We're still in the middle of a pandemic, we're still in a health crisis here, but, overall for the year ahead, people do feel pretty good about their general health and wellness.
Okay, let's talk about the environment, and I think we're going to wrap up from there.
Yeah, and this is the last section that we'll talk about here. There is one more section in the report, so I would encourage people to download the report from Report Pro, talking quickly about what's going to happen with the environment and agriculture. The farm report, it's kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, income will be higher in 2022 because commodity prices are higher. On the other hand, a lot of the pandemic, money that went to farms over the past year is expiring. And then, farms have just seen incredibly high prices when it comes to things like fuel, when it comes to technology. And so that really eats into profits. So, yes, high prices when it comes to the crops themselves, but also high prices that the farms, have to pay for.
And climate.
Climate crisis, we had another crazy year in 2021. It's almost hard to believe, like the Texas freeze was, last year. We saw, those images of the orange skies in the West last year. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't think we're going to see some more extreme weather in 2022. And I think that's the thing, we've talked about in the past that it is a growing consumer concern. So, they're seeing it really impact them, impacting their friends, their family. They see it on the news. And so, as a food industry, we do have to be on top of it even if it's, you know, from the consumer perspective and they're kind of.
And we've said it before, and I think it bears repeating, but what we see in the data is that consumers are more and more associating climate with food. It's not, you know, just climate and fossil fuels, but food looks like one of the key levers that they're looking at to combat climate change. So, you know, regardless of what you think about climate, we should just know that as an industry and as, you know, functioning businesses, there is certainly a concern and an opportunity all around food and its contribution to climate, good or bad.
Absolutely.
Food waste.
And that, so the very last thing we'll talk about really quickly is food waste. We are seeing more of an interest in food waste. I know a lot of the conversation was around plastic and, you know, disposable plastics, single-use plastics, but we are seeing more of the conversation turn to food waste now. So this is actually from a report that we released earlier last year in January, but 72% of consumers say that they're concerned about food waste, which is actually a larger percentage than who say that they're worried about single-use plastic. So actually in California, they recently passed a law, well, they passed a law a long time ago, but it goes into effect this year that actually mandates composting for both consumers and businesses. It goes into effect this year, but then it fully goes into effect in 2024. And so we see a lot of movement in this area. So, you know, if you work in the food industry, at this point, you do have to really consider food waste as a growing concern.
A lot of initiatives around food waste over the last few years. And new solutions, Mike, do we want to talk about this real fast?
I know, I mean, that's just what you just said. We're seeing a lot, you know, of new solutions when it comes to climate in general. There's so much money being poured into this space, so many new technologies, so many new startups, you know, to really kind of combat some of the issues we're seeing when it comes to the environment. I think the next slide here is, you know, related to some of the food waste that we just talked about, which is a startup from Denmark that actually just came to Chicago last year, and they connect consumers with restaurants and retailers that have excess food that would otherwise be thrown away. So these are the types of things that, you know, I think we're only going to absolutely see more of in 2022.
Yeah. And the general outlook is moderate, right? 7% very positive about the environment, 23% somewhat positive. So not quite as negative as we saw for politics, but certainly some room to make things better. 10 flavors and ingredients to watch in 2022. And the top food trend for this year is something that you will learn in 2 weeks on the next webinars. So part 2 of our 2022 trends 2-part kickoff series is in 2 weeks, Thursday, January 20th at noon Central Time. The exact same webinar link that you already have now. You should have this in your calendars already too. Please spread the word. Today was all about the big macro factors that you want to look at for the coming year and beyond. The next one is all about the specific food trends themselves, all the way down to the individual ingredient levels. If you want to see what the big trend predictions are, or even the small trend predictions are, please join us in a couple of weeks. Thank you, everybody. It's nice to be back. Does 2022 feel any different than 2021, Mike? Does it feel like a new year to you?
I think it does. I mean, after doing this report, I do. So
I'm feeling pretty hopeful.
I am too. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something good going on. So thanks again, everybody.